A few years ago, I relocated to a new city, more precisely, the city's periphery. With widely dispersed homes and a serene, quiet atmosphere, it felt much more like a little town. I purchased a modest yet lovely home. Before coming there, I didn't know anyone, and I wasn't really gregarious, so I mostly stayed to myself. However, a knock on the front door occurred a few days following the move. I got up to answer it, as I was still in the middle of unpacking. The man had a spotty medium beard and black hair. He was tall and elderly. He identified himself as Todd, a neighbor who lived a few doors away. He wanted to greet me and extend a warm welcome to the community. I reciprocated the kindness and carried on the small talk for a few minutes, since I valued the gesture. He inquired a few simple inquiries to learn more about myself. The standard ones, such as why I relocated, where I relocated, and whether I relocated with someone. These didn't seem like off-putting inquiries in the context of being a new neighbor. He said he loved the peacefulness of the neighborhood and lived with his wife, Sarah. He left me to finish moving in after our little conversation. Todd appeared to be a pleasant man, merely attempting to be a good neighbor. Even though I knew we wouldn't become close friends or anything, because he was at least 20 or 30 years older than me, it was still comforting to have a friendly person around. Over the following few days, I became accustomed to my new surroundings and took walks about the neighborhood. Strangely, it was difficult to ignore the fact that no one was ever outside. I never noticed any while I looked around or strolled about, neighbors in their yards or on their porches. I felt out of place because the entire town seemed lonely and hollow. To be honest, it was very gloomy. However, Todd returned one afternoon at 4 o'clock. He wanted to inform me that evening at 7:30, he and his wife would be hosting a dinner party at his house with many of the other neighbors. He stated it would be a wonderful chance for me to get to know all the other kind individuals in this area. Considering what I had seen, or I suppose what I hadn't seen, I was most definitely not prepared for this invitation. I accepted the invitation since it looked like this could be my only opportunity to meet others, even though I assumed everyone just kept to themselves like I normally did. After saying he was excited to see me there, he departed. Meeting so many individuals made me both anxious and eager. I was aware that'd be beneficial to me, though. I got ready at 7:30 and headed over to his apartment. The entire area was quiet, dark, and serene. But there was also a peculiar atmosphere that made me feel empty and alone. When I arrived at Todd's house, it appeared to be unoccupied, with no cars or other objects in the vicinity. I made my way to the door. I hammered on it even though it had already busted open. Todd called out from inside right away, telling me to come in and settle in. It was quite silent in the hallways as his voice reverberated through them. There were no additional voices or even movement sounds. Not what I anticipated from a gathering of the entire neighborhood. I moved in a couple of steps. Every room in his house was gloomy and mysterious due to the moody lighting. I made my way to I heard Todd's voice coming from the kitchen, but when I arrived, it was deserted. He wasn't present. I yelled his name. I then yelled his wife's name, but neither of them responded. Then I realized that even the kitchen was empty. There was no food on the table and no indications of a gathering of any kind. And it dawned on me that no one else was present. Suddenly, I heard the front door bang. I was frightened and yelled Todd's name once more, but his house remained eerily silent. I made my way back to the end of the hallway to make sure the front door was closed. I experienced a feeling of impending peril and anxiety that I had never experienced before in my life. I heard a few footsteps coming from someplace in one of the rooms behind me as I hurried up to the front door. I didn't waste any time looking around. I approached the door. I could tell this wasn't an accident because it was locked in 3 distinct locations. Todd called my name and inquired where I was going as I undid all the locks. His voice was getting deeper and less pleasant with each syllable, and I could hear him rapidly approaching from behind. I opened the door and ran back to my house. After giving it some thought, I decided to call the police and let the officers determine his intentions. I'm glad I did, since Todd arrived a few minutes after I got home, pounding on my door and looking out my windows. However, he departed before the police arrived. But from here on out, things only grew stranger. During the police interrogation, it was revealed that Todd had never organized any get-togethers with his neighbors, and that he had neither a wife nor a roommate called Sarah. He spent more than 10 years living there by himself. In essence, everything he told me was false. It was merely a made-up tale to make me feel at ease enough to visit his home. Unfortunately, there was no way to demonstrate that he was attempting to do anything harmful. Therefore, nothing could be done. Everyone, including the police, understood that he couldn't be totally innocent because everything was so strange. However, it was irrelevant. They were powerless to do anything. I got out of there as quickly as I could. Every now and then, I'll Google up that guy's name and hope he's been arrested or something, because I know that if he isn't, he will simply find another victim to entice into his house. I hope he is unable to carry out whatever he intends to do to me. I used to reside in a plain, unremarkable neighborhood in the middle of a typical ancient town. The majority of the local family had been there for years, if not decades. Having grown up there and received the house from my parents when they moved away, I was in a similar situation. I had been living in that residence for 3 years at the time. A new neighbor moved in at some point in the fall, entering one of the homes on the other side of the street. I observed him transferring his belongings out of a U-Haul, and he appeared to be just another regular person. But I wasn't the kind to go introduce myself or anything. After he moved in, a week passed with nothing noteworthy, until I saw the man standing outside my house one evening after returning from work. He didn't appear to be passing by or approaching my house, but I immediately recognized him as the new neighbor. Bree, simply observing it while standing on the sidewalk. After pulling into the garage, I got out to say hello and check on the situation. However, he had already left in the 20 seconds it took me to exit. He must have rushed off. I didn't give it much thought, even though I thought it was incredibly strange. If he was just dropping by to say hello or ask me a question, I would at least be home to answer the door, because I had tomorrow off as well. Surprisingly, I immediately forgot about the guy as I went about my evening. It wasn't until the morning that I thought about him again. I briefly glanced at his house across the street when I was outdoors getting the mail. Nothing appeared to be happening. Nothing. Not even lights on. However, I caught a glimpse of something before turning away. Enter through the window upstairs. I looked twice, but all I saw were the blinds moving back and forth as if he had simply stood there, perhaps observing me. I walked back inside after getting my mail, despite feeling a little uneasy. It might have been a coincidence, or he might have been exploring the new area. I made an effort not to worry. I spent the day performing tasks I had been putting off and then relaxing. Watching YouTube, Netflix, and other standard content. Every now and then, I would glance out the windows to check if he was outside. I had a persistent feeling that I was being observed. However, I never saw anything when I looked. I believed I was safe for the night as the sun fell. But I took one more glance out the window, and that's when I spotted him once more. He was positioned at my driveway's end. I'm not sure what it was about the way he was standing, but I was certain that he had just arrived from the top of my driveway, as if he had just been near my house. I proceeded to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside in his direction. I wasn't attempting to seem irate. I believe I was overly pleasant. I simply wanted to check in with him to see how things were going. However, he pretended to be taking a stroll around the neighborhood as soon as he saw me and began to go down the sidewalk. I called out a few times, but nobody responded. I gave up and went back inside after seeing he wasn't going to turn around halfway down the driveway. I was really sketched out now. I considered something had to be missing. The new neighbor has been observing my house non-stop and has even been caught peeking at me via his window. Everything was so eerie and seemed to be happening for no apparent reason. I continued to stay up for a few more hours. When I went to bed, I didn't feel well, even though I didn't see anything else. It took me some time to fall asleep, and I still felt like I was being observed. I passed out at one point, though I'm not sure how. Nevertheless, I was sweating profusely when I woke up in the middle of the night. I felt really uneasy, as if something was wrong, and my entire body rapidly sat up. But there was silence throughout the entire house. However, I was completely awake, my heart pounding quickly, and my eyes wide open. I switched on the lamp next to me and surveyed the area. Everything appeared to be in order. It appeared as though nothing was happening in the calm room. However, the nagging sense in my stomach that I was being seen persisted, pushing me to not dismiss this as unimportant. I got out of bed and approached the door. I extended my hand to open it. However, upon unlocking it, I experienced this. I had the impression that what I was doing was incorrect, and that perhaps I shouldn't just open it and take a look around. Instead, I put my ear to the door and left it locked. Soft creaks could be heard in the hallway after a short while. I crouched down and peered beneath the door, since I wasn't sure if it was the house or something else. I couldn't see anything beyond the door, but the lights weren't on. I remained on my knees for a short while. Then, out of nowhere, something passed it. I tried not to make a sound when I leaped back. In an instant, the creaking ceased. I was heard by him. Following a brief pause, a number of thunderous footsteps traveled across the room and along the floor. Still in disbelief, I sat up at the front of my bed and tried to remain as silent as I could. The silhouette of his boots was visible beneath the door. They began to move, and all of a sudden, I was unable to see anything. Something covered the entire bottom of the door. I leaned in a little. It took me a moment to realize what it was, but I could just make out an eye staring back at me. He was peering beneath the door. I leaped to my feet, dashed around, and grabbed my phone. It was hard to even call 911 since my hands were trembling so much. I could also hear him pounding on the floor and moving around outside the room. He appeared to have left by the time the cops arrived, and I finished the conversation. Once more, the entire house was silent. But I didn't take the chance of looking around to see whether he was hiding. The house was deserted when the police arrived. I informed them of my suspicions about the neighbor right away. I'm across the street. They approached him and spoke with him. He had obviously been awake for some time. Even though it was 2 in the morning, he answered the door. The M. Apparently, one thing led to another, and the man unintentionally revealed something he shouldn't have known, blowing his cover. After taking him in, they were able to extract the whole story out of him, verifying that he was the one who broke into my house that evening, and that he had been observing me for much longer than I realized. We had never even met before, so it was unclear how he located me, or even why me in general. Even before he moved to the neighborhood, police discovered that my name appeared in his search history multiple times during the past month. He might have even taken the action on purpose to be correct. Across from me. They didn't give him a free pass because he had a history of similar bizarre stalking incidents. I haven't gone a day without thinking about him, even though I shouldn't have to worry about him for a long time. Not knowing all the answers I'm looking for is incredibly awful. There may have been more to his breaking into my house that evening than merely stalking me. I believe he had some terrible motives, and I was fortunate. I refrained from opening my door because of my intuition. I moved a few towns over for job in my late 20s. I think the experience went pretty well. I immediately found a great apartment and moved what little I had into it, and I adjusted into my new job really well. There were only 6 units in the building, 2 on each floor. In essence, each story had a set of stairs leading up to it, and the 2 rooms on each floor had doors across from one another. The woman who lived across from me gave me the tour when I was on the top floor. She may have had a few apartments in the building. The woman was neither unfriendly nor nice, and she was older than me. I believe she was approximately 45. She didn't say much. Monotonous, and didn't seem to give a damn about how she looked. Every time I saw her, she had a worn-out, silent expression on her face, and long, unkempt hair. However, I didn't mind because the apartment room was pleasant enough. To be honest, I didn't think I would ever see her. However, I was completely mistaken. I arrived home at 8 p.m. on my first full day of work following the relocation. Up the stairs and discovered the woman waiting at my room's door. I couldn't even make a statement because I was so exhausted from the long day and didn't anticipate seeing her. She stared at me with that lifeless expression she always had, and I probably made things a little awkward. She then inquired as to whether I typically arrived home from work at this time. I answered that I wasn't sure because I had just begun the job, even though I thought that was a strange question. She turned, opened her door, entered her room, and slammed the door behind her without even acknowledging my response. I simply went inside my unit, not sure if she was intentionally being so rude, or if she was upset with me for some other reason. I didn't even prepare dinner before going to bed, since I was too exhausted to think about it. I must have had a nice night's sleep, because I was unconscious until 6 in the morning. When I was startled awake by a loud knock on the door. It frightened and bewildered me so much that I sprung out of bed. I was forced to go over and answer the door because the knocks continued. The woman appeared to be a walking corpse as she stood there, looking exactly the same. Still struggling to wake up, I asked drowsily, "Can I help you?" She offered a bizarre question while flashing an odd, undoubtedly false smile. Query. She asked me to visit her after work tonight. Her speech still lacked emotion, which made it feel quite unnerving. There was something wrong with this. I attempted to be polite and explained that I was simply going to be busy, even though I wasn't sure what she meant by coming over after work, dinner or something. She turned around once again and went back into her room, slamming the door behind her. It is 6 in the morning. the men after me already, so I decided to stay up and prepare for work. I arrived home at 7 o'clock after leaving the flat at 8 o'clock. Fortunately, the woman wasn't outside my door, so I was able to enter my apartment and sleep this time without having any strange talks. I had no idea what was going on with her. I was more alarmed by her actions than concerned. In any case, I prepared dinner and went to bed at 10 o'clock. My alarm was set for 6:45, but I was startled awake once more by someone banging on the front door. Already certain of who it was, I stood up. The same woman with the same lifeless face was standing there when I opened the door. Even stranger was the fact that the conversation was almost exactly the same as it had been the day before. She requested that I visit her after work, and I complied. Same justification. I was absolutely perplexed and uncomfortable about the whole situation once she returned to her apartment and shut the door. It was hard to understand what she was truly trying to convey with all of this because of her lack of emotion. I stayed up and had a quick breakfast before going to work. Once again, the day was lengthy. I stayed at work until at least 8, but most likely closer to 8:30. It took me till 9:15 to return to the flat. The entire area was silent and deserted. Since most people were presumably going to bed by then, there was no one outside, and the building's lights were all off. I'm hoping that this means the woman won't bother me tonight and that I can enter covertly. I parked, climbed the steps, and tried not to make too much noise. She wasn't in my room when I got up. With a breath of relief, I inserted my key into the door, but there was a problem. It was opened already. The revelation hit me, and I froze for a moment. The only other person who could unlock it had to be her. However, I couldn't quite believe it at the time. The woman was unsettling, to be sure, but not particularly so. This couldn't possibly be as horrible as I was thinking. I observed that the door handle felt strange when I opened it, but I chose not to pay attention because I was preoccupied with a more urgent matter. I walked a little distance into my flat before the door shut behind me. My bedroom door was open, but the lights were all off as I had left them. As I approached and peered into my room, I could hear my heart pounding. The woman stood before my bed, her face largely obscured by shadows, but I could still see the expression on her face, one of emotionless dullness. "What are you doing?" I began to murmur. But as soon as I looked down at the kitchen knife she was holding, I stammered. I bolted toward the door after my moment of shock. I tried to swing it open by grabbing the handle, but I nearly lost my balance because I didn't think it would move. It was lodged in the door. Not even the knob would turn. I realized right away that the woman had rigged the door, locking myself and her inside. I felt a surge of adrenaline at that very instant, and instead of being afraid, I was furious about whatever this crazy woman was doing. She approached me while still carrying the knife, but I don't think she was prepared for a battle, since I was able to take her by surprise and remove the weapon. I restrained her and phoned the cops, controlling her until they arrived. I didn't realize she had actually received a quick slash on the back of my arm until they had her in handcuffs. Not too horrible, but it wasn't exactly painless after the excitement subsided. In any case, it appears that she had a number of major diseases and had not been taking the right medication for a number of months, which caused her to have an episode. Her family gave me that justification, but it didn't really make a difference. But in the end, everything came together. All right. I was able to manage myself, and the entire experience had no long-term effects on me. It most certainly could have, but it was 1,000 times worse.